do chapter 1 tonight, and then predictably chapter 2 and onward after that. Let's offer a word of prayer and then dive into our discussion. Our God and our Father, thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. Father, thank you for the relationship you've given each one of us here at Jamestown to be a part of this group and to have one another to help us be guided closer to you, to imitate Jesus, to go to heaven one day, Father. Thank you for the relationships we have here. Thank you for the opportunity we have to study here at this midpoint in the week to sort of reset, to refocus our minds and our hearts on the things that truly matter. Father, be with those who cannot be with us this evening. Many are sick and some travel, and help us to be good servants to them if we can. Father, please help us as we deal with those who've chosen not to be here. Help us to be encouraging and to be forward, but do so with love. And try to convince them that this is definitely the place to be. Thank you for the opportunity to study this book and for your wisdom that provided it and that your power preserved it. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, I have to do my 30-second protest on not writing my own material. So here it goes, 30 seconds.
That's enough.
That's enough. Like the 2-minute meeting later, right? That we'll time one another. I have this thing about Bible class lesson books, and the thing is this. If you can accomplish answering all of the questions in your Bible class lesson book without actually opening the Bible, you sort of have a problem. My humble opinion, it is what it is. It's free, so I'm not going to charge. But I call it the lesson book challenge, okay? If you can sit there with your lesson book and answer all of its questions without ever actually cracking the cover on the thing to the left, which is the Bible, by the way, that's sort of my contention, all right? So my first thing, number one, and this is true for any class, if you've not studied your Bible, but you have studied your book, you're not ready for Bible class, right? It's called Bible class, not Bible book class. Anyway, 30 seconds. In your introductory material, there was a little bit of I was going to go into. Mike asked me earlier today if I was going to get into the debate on who wrote Hebrews, and the short answer is no. If you've read through any of the introduction, you'll probably see a section on that. The opinions on who wrote Hebrews are wide and varied and have been defended and attacked ever since the book, basically the ink dried on the book. Clement, I think, was the one that had the quote that says, "Who wrote it? God only knows." Mike reminded me something of earlier today, though. There are several Old Testament books that are anonymous, we do not know their authorship, but they've been regarded as canon for centuries. Hebrews certainly fits that category. If you read Rader's material in the introduction, basically he leans toward Paul, and that's not a bad choice. It's just not one that we know, and there are good arguments for and against that. His argument that this is written to Jewish Christians, I think, is universally regarded. Rader believes that this was probably written to Christians in the area of Palestine, which, okay, I'm good with that too. The short answer is it's a really good book, and it's written to Christians who were formerly Jews to try to help them understand why they need to remain to be Christians, all right? I love this quote by David Allen. This is in the New American Commentary series. It helps us understand this book and how to go about looking at it. He says, Hebrews is a sermon prepared to be read aloud to a group of auditors, or whoever, who will receive its message not primarily through reading and leisured reflection, but orally. Short answer is the book of Hebrews was meant to be read out loud as a sermon. This sort of poses a bit of a challenge for studying it, because how do we always study the book of Hebrews? We sit down and we read it, right? And we sort of think about it slowly, the way you would think about a Romans or a Galatians or whatever, right? Hebrews is different. It's literally going to make more sense read out loud, right? And you'll kind of hear that, and that's part of what I want to build into each class, is we're actually going to read the text. Okay, and there's not much tonight, and I think none of the chapters are very long, so it's not a huge use of our time to do that. Speaking of uses of time, let's go to the book and look at chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. The following quote, which is way too small for you to read, comes from somebody in the Messianic Judaism movement. I'm not a fan of that movement. I don't subscribe to them, but he said something here that I thought was valuable. Well, let's look at the first two verses. That way we just make sense of what he said. Consider the idea that this is not written to you, which is true. It's written to formerly Jewish Christians in the first century, right? Their Bible consists of what? What does their Bible look like?
Old Testament.
It's the 39 books of the Old Testament, right? There may be, depending on the date of authorship, maybe something's written by them, probably not, right? Their Bible is the 39. It's the Old Testament. Listen to how Hebrews 1 sounds to them, right? Try to imagine, someone being upset in that time period with that background over what the Hebrew writer says. He says, long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, He's spoken to us by His Son, whom He appointed the heir of all things, through whom also He created the world. Why might that cause consternation to a Jewish Christian, we'll just call him that, in that time period? Why is that sort of an eye-opening, what did you say, kind of thing? Bob, give it
Well, the last days has got confusing tremendously.
Okay.
Because what does that mean? Are we in the last days? Are we looking for the end of time? What does that literally mean? And we know Peter said he was in the last days as we've studied. So we know that doesn't mean it, but would they have known it?
Possibly.
Maybe.
I would say there's a strong possibility they understand what that means, right?
Okay.
Because again, the prophecy of the last days comes from Joel and other places, so they at least have that in their arsenal. Why would this upset a Jewish Christian in the first century?
I think it's just the fact that it's spoken to us by His Son, calling it out His Son, and He's the heir, that He's created the whole world, and that they're not recognizing Jesus as His Son.
Yeah. So, Mark, were you going to
I
add?
was gonna say they rejected. Yeah, he's claiming that God is speaking through the one they rejected.
So there's that. Now remember, these are still Christians. So I would say they've gotten over the hump of this is the Messiah, right? Listen to it again. Long ago, I'm skipping the next line, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets, but in these last days He's spoken to us by His Son. Why would that upset a Jewish Christian? Corey?
They revered the prophets, they venerated them. So there was this temptation to put Jesus on the same plane as the prophets, just like His own apostles did.
Yes.
We'll build a temple to you and to Moses and to Elijah. And God even had to tell them at the Transfiguration, my Son is bigger than, better than. We're not even in the same ball field as these others.
So at the very least, the Hebrew writer has elevated Jesus to the prophets. But then he goes beyond.
Sure.
He elevates Jesus to beyond the prophets. Now, I know it wouldn't be true, but imagine someone writing like a Hebrews part 2 to us. Maybe it's just called Christian, I don't know. And it says, long ago, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets, by the fathers, by the prophets, and through Jesus Christ. But now in these days, He has spoken to us through, I'm going to pick on David, David Boone, whom He has elevated above. What would be the problem? That's a real strong contention, right? That's a, wait a minute, what did you just say? We have the text, and you're telling us there's someone else with more? You're going to have to go about proving that. I think that's one of the really big things that the book of Hebrews does. It starts off with a whammy if you're in this audience, in this time period. And then most of the rest of this book is going to be spent developing and proving that point. Right? You're telling us Jesus is above Moses? He's above David? He's above Abraham? He's a priest? You're telling us a lot of things that are hard to take. Not unusual for Christians to hear that kind of thing. That's where this heads. Mike, did you have a thought?
Yeah, it's not just above the prophets. He created the world.
Right.
I mean, this makes Jesus God.
Yes. That's a huge problem
It'd
or
be
a huge
blasphemous.
issue to have to work through.
It would have been blasphemous to their ears.
Absolutely it was. Right? There is only one God to the Jews. And this book's going to have to prove Jesus is on par. He is there. He is on that level. Right? Yes?
This might sound like a silly question, but if they've already accepted that Jesus is the Messiah, then how, seems like those two things go together. Like, how do you accept Jesus as the Messiah but not acknowledge that He is in this position that Hebrews is explaining?
So if they accept Jesus as the anointed one, with the Israelites, there have been anointed ones throughout their history. Normally, they're priests or kings. But Hebrews is going to say this person, the anointed, is not just a priest, prophet, king. He is above all of those things, right? It is going to elevate Jesus to the level of God. And for this audience, that's going to be tough, right? That's going to be hard to deal with. Part of the reason why Hebrews is written as a giant proof text, you might say, because it goes back and it references the Old Testament. It says this is true, and if this is true, that's true, and that's the argument for this. The line there, kind of close to the bottom of this, the claim that Yeshua or Jesus' words held equal authority to those of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, and the prophets demanded strong justification. If you're going to make the claim that this is who Jesus is, you're going to have to prove it. And that's what Hebrews does. That's the point of it. In terms of the what and the how, right? The what of Hebrews you see right at the very end of the book, right? 13 and verse 22, whoever it was wrote the book of Hebrews, or recorded the sermon and then put the tag on the end there, describes it as a word of exhortation. It's a written sermon, and it's a sermon all up until the last paragraph, where you get basically okay, I've written this to you, say hello to some people. Like there's some stuff right at the end that's not what you would think of as part of a sermon. Even the introduction isn't like a letter, like all of Paul's other things, right? There's no greeting, there's no address, who it's from, none of that stuff, right? It just jumps in with the introduction. The how of the book of Hebrews, I think, is in 3 and verse 1. Lots of people pick different verses for what they like for the summary of Hebrews. I like 3 and verse 1 because of the two words, consider Jesus. To the Hebrew Christians, to the formerly Jewish, now Christian brethren there in that area, the Hebrew writer's point is to say, I want you to think about Jesus. I want you to think about him in a lot of different ways, all right? The book of Hebrews makes the point that Jesus, or something that Jesus is affiliated with, is superior or better than that which was given in the Old Covenant, okay? And Rader does a good job of sort of showing was it 4 times the person is greater than a former person, and then 3 times something about Jesus is greater than something else. This is sort of the way the book's written, right? Jesus is better. And one big thing that happens over and over is the author makes the logical point of, if you accept this lower thing, then the greater thing you must also accept, right? If you were willing to accept the Levitical priesthood, you must accept someone higher than that. If you're willing to accept Moses, you must be willing to accept Jesus. If you took their covenant, you have to accept the new one, right? So it's not just consider him, but you need to understand he is greater on every level than that. Thoughts, questions, stuff you want to throw in?
Would you think that they would have perceived the fact that we're elevating Jesus, that would diminish Abraham, Moses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Because, I mean, we look at...
It would at least equate them.
We look at chapter 3, for example, and he brings up Moses. Moses was a great guy. He did all these things. Obviously, paraphrasing. He did all these things, and he was a great man. But Jesus is greater than him.
Yes.
So it doesn't seem there's an effort to diminish the prophets and those
No, I don't think there is.
But I was just curious if you felt like there would have been a perception of that.
Possibly. I mean, think about someone who has an issue with this would say what? Well, they're making Moses out to be nothing. It's not true, but it's, you can imagine someone saying that. Right? What else? Yes, sir.
You may not have this, you may have it in it. If you do, just stop me. But
No, go ahead.
the
Odds are I
audience
don't.
that is receiving this, I think needs to have some comment made, because we know that the earliest it could have been was the day of Pentecost. And it looks like that the latter part of it is, of the book, that it's go outside the gate.
Yes.
It sort of points to the city of Jerusalem just about ready to be destroyed.
Yes.
That's where I put it, about 60, 68.
Yes.
And so you're getting into some second generation Christians. You're getting into some that probably were really excited when they saw Pentecost, when they saw some of the miracles happening. But it's now changing, and you're living right in the middle of a rebellion that's going to end up with the temple destroyed and all of that. And they're gonna need some guidance to take them through that period of
Yeah.
their own faith.
A very pro-Jewish rebellion,
Yeah,
which would exclude people who weren't, on that team.
yeah.
Whereas they may have been tolerated in and around the temple. Not true anymore.
But you would also have the idea that, am I really sure about this? Jesus hasn't come back yet. And is it really the case that he is, I can just imagine some of these questions that must have been arising in their minds in that context.
I agree, 100%. They're going to need a reason to say, why do we need to stay this way? Not why should we go back to Judaism, right? That's what the Hebrew writer does. Other thoughts or comments or things you want to throw in? All right, let's read it. This is Hebrews chapter 1. I'll read through the first 4 verses, and then I'll probably get a volunteer to go on from there. Hebrews 1, again, verse 1, the English Standard Version. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he's spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he's inherited is more excellent than theirs. Verses 5 to 9. Corey, and then I'll let you do the next section, all right?
For which of the angels did he ever say, "You are my son, today I begot you"? And again, I'll be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. And when he again brings the firstborn into the world, he says, "And let all the angels of God worship him." And of the angels, he says, "Who makes his angels winds, and his ministers a flame of fire?" But of the Son, he said, "Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. And the righteous scepter is the scepter of his kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated lawlessness. Therefore God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness above your companions."
All right, 10 to 14.
And you, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. And they will all grow old like a garment. Like a cloak you will fold them up, and they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will not fail. But to which of the angels has he ever said, "Sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool"? Are you not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for those who will inherit salvation?
Okay, very good. Now again, we're having to stop because, obviously time constraints. Because the chapter 2 begins with therefore. So you're missing sort of the conclusion of the argument, but that at least takes us through chapter 1. What is the assertion that's made first in chapter 1? We already kind of talked about this a little bit, but what's the point that he's going to go approve talking about Jesus? What is it?
You got it right there.
Well, I got part of it, right?
Jesus is superior to all the prophets. And
Yes.
He's God's son. He is God.
Yes, as God, as God's Son, he is above the prophets. They are not brought low in terms of they're not discredited because of who he is. He is just leapfrogged him. He's above. Mark?
Right, I was going to say, this is not about denigrating the prophets in any way. The
Correct.
problem here is they are not elevating Jesus to the degree they should.
Yeah.
And that's his argument isn't pushing them down, it's lifting Christ up.
Yes.
It's saying he has a position far above these others that you put your trust in and that you worship.
Yes. He is not in the book of Hebrews speaking evil of the different things that are mentioned. That's something we need to remember. We sometimes think about it like, okay, our covenant was great and theirs was terrible. No. Their covenant was good. Their covenant was God-given. Their words were God-given. Their scriptures are God-given. He's not lowering the prophets and the fathers. How else could he quote from all of those guys to prove his point? Right? So if he's lowering them, they're no longer trustworthy. He's leaving them where they are as a standard, as a word from God, and then saying, okay, these guys say Jesus is up here. Right? So that's one thing to remember with Hebrews. We're not tearing down the old. We're just saying something better has come along. Okay?
He begins by saying that he's never called any of the angels sons.
Okay. So the first big assertion is Jesus is greater than the prophets. The second one, verse 4, he's greater than the angels too. Right? So they would have understood, okay, the angels would have been somewhere between God and the fathers and the prophets, right? So the angels are somewhere between God and mankind. You've got innumerable texts to show that, right? Gideon's a good example of that, right? Gideon's parents with the angels. It's obvious he's not on their level. He's above them. And you could multiply examples. But on top of, Jesus is better than the prophets. He is superior to the angels. And that's what verses 5 through 13 prove. Yes, sir. And then Julian, you're next.
You're going there on 14, so just keep going. That's what I was going to say.
Oh, that 14 is sort of the conclusion of that argument?
They serve to bring the salvation, but they are not the author of this salvation. They are serving to help bring people to salvation.
Yes, as great as they are still ministering. They're still servants to God. They are not God, and therefore, according to the Hebrew writer, they're not Jesus either. There was a good, was it in the footnote? I don't remember. Rader mentions that the temptation would have been to elevate Jesus. Oh, it's a paragraph, something down on page 17. He quotes from King's commentary about this might be an effort to make him part of the angelic hierarchy. That's certainly not true. Yep. Oh, yes, sir.
Well, not only was he a prophet, but the prophets spoke about him, and he fulfilled prophecy.
And that's what the Hebrew writer uses to make his point. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, I mean, the important thing here also to understand is he's using the law to make his assertions here about Jesus. The law itself says that he will be greater than them.
And so the validity and the truth of the Old Testament is solid. It is required. One thing I love about the Hebrew writer, and this is something in chapter 1. Where in chapter 1 does the Hebrew writer tell you where all the quotes came from? Because Paul does that sometimes, right? He says, in Jeremiah where it says, or in Psalms when it says, where does the Hebrew writer actually tell you where all these passages are? He never does. Why?
If you're a Hebrew, you should know.
They know where they are. With this group of people, you could just say, you are my son, today I've begotten you. And they would go, oh yeah, I remember that. That's early in Psalms, or Psalm 2, if they would have even known that, to be that specific.
And this stuff, if you think about it, if I'm trying to persuade a group of my peers, if you think about it, these are Bible scholars, and I'm trying to persuade them from the text that Jesus is greater, I need to use the text to show them how they're not understanding it correctly. And if they would go back and look at it more carefully, they could draw the conclusions that I'm trying to get them to see.
Yep. So he doesn't take a lot of time going, as the prophet so-and-so said. They know that, right? It's not lost on them. So just something cool to mention. And the reason why I mention that, if you're a person that writes in your Bible, I really hope you are, okay? Every time you come across what looks like a quotation, write it down. Even if it's in the footnote, just put it somewhere there on the page where you know where it comes from. Super helpful, right? This, for whatever reason, I did this a long time ago, and it's been one of the more helpful things ever. When you're reading through something like Romans or Hebrews or wherever, where there's a ton of quotations, just real quick, write down where it came from, all right? And it's super helpful. All right, speaking of the argument, so he doesn't really go much into he's greater than the prophets. That will happen. Most of this section is spent saying Jesus is greater than the angels. And to do that, he quotes from a number of passages, okay, all across the Old Testament, all different sorts of books. I've always found it fascinating that they quote more from Psalms than anywhere else. We tend to think of Psalms as, well, it's just the songbook. It's not as serious as the law or the prophets or the history or the whatever. They didn't have that idea. They saw it as just as serious as the rest. So maybe a good lesson. Yeah.
Luke 24:44, Jesus said he came to fulfill this law.
Yeah. The law and the prophets and the Psalms, right?
Just another quick point, just in this whole chapter, he's just setting up Christ and who he is and his glory, because the rest of the book, he's using that and as in all the contrast. I mean, we see right now, he's setting him up, he's superior to angels, but in chapter 2, whom he made lower than the angels. So it's a constant contrast, but before you make any of those arguments, you have to set up who he is.
Yes.
And he does it, in the first couple of verses.
Right. And I mean, and what I like the way Rader in the book went through really each one of those things. What was it, verses 2 and 3? There were 7 of them. And so he goes into a little bit of detail as to here's what it means if Jesus is the heir. Here's what it means if he made the world, if he's the brightness of his glory, all those different sorts of things. Each one of those statements is weighty. It's not just a platitude. This is serious business, right? And it's all really densely compacted just in those 2 verses. But as we said, you can see, even if you just went through the text and highlighted all the quotations, most of it's quotation, right? He speaks of Psalm 2, you are my son. He's like, well, who is this? God didn't say that to an angel. He must have said it to someone else in reference to Jesus. And then 2 Samuel 7, one of the most important passages in the Old Testament. God's promise to David that his house would reign forever, right? The throne would never be taken away from the line of David. And he quotes from that passage, which is you would think that was a natural sort of place to go. There is a little bit of a question as to the third quote from Let All God's Angels Worship Him. If you go read Deuteronomy 32:43 in your Bible, it's going to look very different than that. They do a good job in the book of explaining it. It came from the Septuagint translation of that, the Greek version of the Old Testament. And that happens a couple of times. But notice the contrast in 7 and 8, right? In 7, he quotes from Psalm 104, and he says, he makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. That's poetry, but it's, in the parallelism, you can see how that works. It's 2 lines that say the same thing. His angels are winds, his ministers are flames of fire, right? So angels, ministers, those 2 things are tied together. Angels are servants of God. But in the next one, but of the Son, he says, your throne, O God's forever and ever, right? And then notice the last bit. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. That must refer to someone other than God the Father, who is regarded as God himself. And that's the sort of where the argument goes. He does the same thing in Psalm 102, and then asks the same question in Psalm 110 and verse 1 as to where that goes. And it's really, that's it. That's a short chapter. We haven't dug into everything there, but 14 verses, and he said a lot. Yes, sir.
Kyle, I don't want to subvert your discussion here, but I want to throw this out. Because this is one that Jehovah's Witnesses like to use to make the point that Jesus is less than God. And they use verse 5, you are my son, today I have begotten you. See, Jesus was begotten. He is a created being. He's not God. See what I'm saying? That's the way they use. Now, my counter is, wait, hold it. When a mare has a foal, the foal is a horse just as much as the mare.
Correct.
You know, the son is of the same nature as the father. You know, when a man has a child, the child is like the father, right?
Right.
Of the same nature. That's my counterpoint is, no, his point is he is God because he is his son. And so how would God have something less than a God, if you will, if you want to use those terms, because that's who he is.
Right. So it's good to show that Jesus is of the same nature as God. You still have to prove the point that God didn't create him, right? Like the same as himself. That you still have to deal with that, but yeah. The Jehovah's Witnesses, boy, that is
Yeah. They
fascinating bunch.
Yeah, it is. They like to use this to actually subvert the argument that he's making here.
Right.
In this chapter.
It doesn't help them because if he's a created thing, then how does he support all created things? Anyway,
Well,
it falls
the
apart.
other part they overlook is that he was begotten in that he had a physical body. Today I have begotten you. I could just as easily say, yeah, he was begotten because he took the form of flesh.
All right. Other thoughts, other comments? Try to be respectful of everyone's efforts spent outside of class, because I'm the world's worst about getting to the questions. This is my New Year's resolution for 26. get to the questions. All right, so we got 15 minutes and not nearly enough time for all of them, but this is a start, right? You gotta start somewhere. This is the road to recovery. Question 1, why was it important for the Hebrew writer to show Christ is much better than prophets and angels? Why does this matter? Bob, first one.
Because who they listen to has to be shifted. It has to go away from the prophets, the angels, whatever it is they put as the great authority now is Jesus. And so they must understand that everything from Jesus is the truth and far superior to what was told. I'm not saying that the prophets lied. That's not my point. I'm pointing at the importance of whatever Jesus says comes directly from God.
Julian and then Corey.
I was just thinking about the transfiguration, and you see there with Jesus, Moses, and Elijah, and Peter's wanting to make 3, and God says, no, you hear him. He's the important one.
It's a good argument for the disciples on the mountain, right? But like we said a moment ago, like Mike mentioned, these are second generation Christians. They weren't there. They need something to go, why do I have to take what Jesus says and hold him as superior to all these other things, right? We need an argument for that, Corey.
There's a temptation to go back. I think it's part of the reason this is written in this way. And so you think about whether you became a Catholic first and then became a Christian in Christ Church, there's the pomp and circumstance to look back to. Or if you came from the Christian church and you came to the truth, there's things about that pull at you. Same thing is true of Judaism. The prophets and Moses and Elijah, they still pull at you. So part of it is written in that sense to keep them solid with the real foundation who was there from the beginning in creation. The second piece is they're going to be facing persecution or are facing persecution. And so it's important to remember that because no time greater in their life than you want to go back than when what you're doing is real hard.
Yes. Yes. I would go even further than they would be tempted to go back to Judaism if Jesus isn't superior. I think they would have to go back to Judaism because if he's the same as every other prophet, then Moses still applies, right? All the things we had still apply. Christianity only works if the message of Christ and his death, burial, and resurrection and all that comes after it is superior to that. If not, if it's the same, then, well, he's just another prophet, a good one albeit, and we go back to what we've been doing. You would have to go back to what was the original authoritative standard if Jesus isn't superior to that, right? It's a given. It has to do that. All right. Now, I'll try to shoehorn in, like, why does this matter to me and you? This is my effort to do that. We have to make the same sort of argument, not maybe in the context of Jesus is greater than the prophets, but we have to make a similar argument, and my question is where? Where and when do we have to say things like this? Make the same claim. What Jesus says and who he is greater than fill in the blank, right? When and how do we have to do that?
I mean, if you're dealing with anybody who, say you're dealing with somebody from the Mormon church.
That was who I had in mind.
This means, what he says means more than what Joseph Smith said. Or, I mean, kind of the same thing, you're dealing with anybody, or, well, my preacher said this. You have to look at that and say, Jesus is greater than your preacher.
Yes.
What he says does not mean as much as what Jesus said.
Yes. Kimberly? Absolutely.
I was thinking back to what Corey said, that what Jesus said and who he was and who he is greater than the pomp and circumstance. Like, he's greater than all the people, yes, but he's greater than what you feel and what you think.
Yes.
And, the stuff that you pulled out of a hat, that you have 2 verses that don't actually apply, like
Right.
that kind of stuff.
Whatever the authority is, we have to be able to make the argument, say Jesus is greater than that. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I think that ties back into question 1 of also why is it important that it was written? It's because this is the authority.
Yes.
So when this comes along to us today, whether we're challenged by this or we're a new Christian and we have questions, like they were new Christians and they had questions, my authority, my foundation, well, I know because it explicitly tells. I mean, we know because we can see the examples, we can infer, but in this case, it explicitly tells me,
Yes.
this is what I'm supposed to do and how I'm supposed to understand.
Yes. So it shows us that this is necessary. There's this temptation to just say, well, leave everybody alone and you all think what you want. this doesn't allow for that. This is an inspired example of you can't go back to Judaism, and here's why, right? So not only proving that specific point, but the idea that we have to do that in the future, I think is tied up in this. One more.
I think also and it's true for us as it was for them, a lot of times growth is a process. And you think of the time when it first started to dawn on someone that maybe the dietary laws don't matter. That would have been a big hurdle to get over.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe my neighbor who does something on Saturday isn't sinning. That would have been huge for someone who had grown that way their entire life. In the same way we see people today that might struggle with things from their past life that they knew were true from the time they were knee-high, and all of a sudden there's someone telling them, saying, no, that really isn't. That's hard.
It would have been hard to take. You reminded me of Acts 16, verses like 1 through 5. You know, Paul comes to Derbe and Lystra. He meets Timothy. He takes Timothy with him. And it says in verse 4, they went on their way through the cities. They've delivered to them, the Jews, for observance the decisions have been reached by the apostles' elders who were in Jerusalem. They had to go around explaining to Jews this kind of thing, right? Here is why Christ and not Judaism. Paul and Timothy did that kind of thing. Part of the reason why people think Hebrews was written by Paul, because it's kind of the thing he would do, okay? And Peter and the rest. All right. 1 in verse 1. What's meant by God speaking in various times and in various ways? What does that mean, that phrase? I love the King James. Is it various and sundry?
Sundry times.
Sundry times and diverse manners, right? It's like diverse. It's like they're, they did it underwater. What does that mean, that phrase mean? Yes, ma'am. Yes. So God spoke to people through at many opportunities or many episodes, right, of that. And what about the other one?
Various different ways.
All kinds of.
Even used the donkey.
Yeah. The entire audiovisual suite was available to God, right? And all of the different angles you could think of. He uses daytime dreams. He uses nighttime dreams. He talks to prophets. He talks to this. I mean, there's a lot of different ways this happened. I'm going to skip with this because that was my attempt to argue with the book. When were the last days and how do we know? He mentions it this long ago. In the last days, he's spoken to us by his Son. If we meet any premillennials, if you meet any other people of that slant, you know that that's a big loaded phrase. What is meant by that? What are the last days?
I'm going to deviate here. I'm not sure if the...
Is it about the last days?
No, in this context of this book, if he's not speaking in terms of simply, it's a relative term, that in the past it was this way, but now it's this way. So it's last days as compared to former days. I'm not sure here if he's saying that we are in the last days. There are other passages to establish that. I'm not sure that's what he's trying to establish here to the Hebrew audience. He's simply saying, in the past God spoke this way, but now he doesn't.
So you're saying like it doesn't have to be the last days.
Yeah,
it's
just a relative term. Recently he's speaking this way as opposed to a former time.
Okay. What he used to do and what he does now, right? Kind of a way of putting it.
I can interpret this more than one way.
Okay. What else? All right, over here, we got to get, yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say, that's the way I've always interpreted it, is it's just a recognition of time. Never heard, well, I mean, I've heard other arguments.
Yeah.
Never thought of it as
Mike?
any.
I have always understood it to be, you had the patriarchal age, the Mosaical age, and the Christian age, and that is this whole period. That's what I've understood. Could I add another comment?
Sure.
What is said in chapter 1 is really in verses 1 through 4. And everything thereafter is to prove what is in 1 through 4.
Yes.
And how does he prove it? By giving book, chapter, and verse. Well, only he doesn't give the...
We're on the same wavelength. I got one coming.
Okay, go ahead.
I think you can take it both ways and both ways be true, right? I think it is just a relative reference to then versus now. It could be, the Christian age going on, until the return of Christ. Of course, you remember Peter uses that phrase. Quoting from Joel 2, of course, Peter says what's happening in Joel is now. So what they would have understood back then, of course, they knew their Old Testament. Peter says that it's now. It's happening here among you live. What does it mean that Christ is the brightness of the glory of God, or that he's the radiance of the glory of God? Kind of an odd expression, but it carries something important with it. What is it?
Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father.
You've seen me, you've seen the Father. That is the most simple, profound thing in that whole chapter. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father, right? He is not lesser. He is not inferior. He is, right? He is. Peter says in that chapter, show us the Father. And Jesus is almost exasperated that they don't get that he is. He can't make it any more clear without killing them as to what the Father is and the type of what he does.
And you can think of it, how much more could God love me than to send his Son to take on the form that I have?
Right.
To be like me, so that he could understand me, he could speak to me face to face, he could teach me, help me understand who God is.
Right.
How much more could God care about me than what he did?
Yeah, understand us wouldn't have been the goal. Understand him, right? Is I think the overarching goal for one of them to come through that. All right. What does it mean? I have a long quote there. We're going to go past it. If you answered that, I hope you did well. What's meant by Christ upholding all things by the word of his power?
Actively sustaining creation.
Yeah, he didn't just create all things. Well, it's weird to say he didn't just create everything, right? But that's kind of true. Not only was he present and active and God spoke everything, and Jesus is called the Word, so there's an element there. But everything continues to exist by his power, right? He keeps everything going and not breaking down over time.
I'll give you the scientific argument. Everything goes to chaos. By itself, everything goes to disorder.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that it doesn't is because he upholds it.
Yes, keeps it from doing so. Mm-hmm. All right, the 5 points Jesus makes to prove Christ is superior to the angels. These is basically straight out of the book, right? He kind of does these 5 things, right? Number 1, Christ has a better name than they do, right? That's described. The angels themselves worship Jesus. So, the lesser, the greater is blessed by the lesser, right? There's an idea of subservience that applies to Jesus and the angels. Jesus is king. The angels merely serve the king. They are powerful, mind you, but they still are inferior to God. And if Jesus is king, if he rules as God, then he's superior to them. He's the creator, and he is Lord. Okay, what evidence does the chapter give that Jesus is deity?
He is the Son of God.
Right. You are my son, right? Same in nature as Jesus.
He's called God in verse 8.
Right. So there's a quotation from Psalm 45 where your throne, O God. You can't get any clearer than that. And in Psalm 102, the same sort of thing I read the wrong one. Yeah, Psalm 45 was the one. He says it again down in verse 9. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you.
Verse 1 says, through whom he created the earth.
Right. In the beginning, God created the earth. So it's everywhere, right? This sort of argument. All right. That's a really cool thing, but I can't take time on it now. Why would the writer need to quote from so many Old Testament passages? Come on, man.
That's what they do.
Proof positive it was written by a preacher, all right? Because he is going to give you 99 verses to prove one thing. But honestly, why? Why so many?
Because it's written.
Excuse me.
Go ahead, Mark.
One of you, y'all rock, paper, scissors, figure it out.
Go ahead.
I'm saying because it's written to people who know the law. You have to convince them from the law itself that Christ is better.
You've said something pretty outstanding, scandalous, outrageous to their ears. You're going to have to prove it, right?
I was going in the same direction. That this is consistent with what your own books say.
Yes. Yes. Okay. What must we do with quote-unquote preaching that rarely implements the Scripture? What do we do with the 25-minute sermon where you get 3 minutes of reading and the rest is calling it commentary is kind?
Ignore it, minimize it.
It's not preaching.
Yeah, it's not preaching.
If someone's not saying a thing and then showing you where by the authority God has put into print, where that comes from, the red flag has to go up. As good and as comforting as whatever it might be, there's a difference between having your ears tickled and having them convicted, right? With, like Mike said earlier, book, chapter, verse. We've got to do a good job of that, right? Demand better and expect better, right?
There's a place for that. It's called a motivational speech or a TED Talk.
Yeah, it's
I
not
mean,
called a
it's
sermon.
just- It's
Yep.
not preaching though.
All right. Okay. We did okay. Next week, Lord willing, chapter 2. We won't have to do the introductory material. We'll be able to hop straight into the text, so we'll get to talk about that a little bit more. And Lord willing, we'll do that next week. All right. Thank you, guys.